morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Alex Paul from InvestorStream, and I'll be your host today. This morning, we have Lindian Resources CEO Alistair Stevens and Chairman Asimwe Kumbuga, who will be discussing the company's mine development drilling program, community and government relations, and the forward works program at its Kangankunde rare earths project in Malawi. Alistair and Asimwe will also be on hand to address any questions following the presentation. We have been inundated with questions for this webinar, which is fantastic, so apologies in advance if we don't get to your question during the Q&A. A copy of the webinar will also be available on Lindian's website and social media platforms later today, but for now I'd like to throw it over to Alistair to kick things off for us. Alistair, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Alex, and thanks everyone for attending. On behalf of Asimwe and myself, very pleased to be participating in this webinar and give everyone an update of what's happening with the company and its assets. So first of all, I guess everyone knows that we just raised $16 million from the previous, or the just recently completed placement at 21 cents. There was options attached to that. I'll discuss perhaps the funding a little bit further later on. I guess the most important thing is, what is the use of funds for? Well, it's for the second tranche payment for the Kangankunde rare earth project acquisition of the company called Rift Valley Resource Developments Limited, but also for development and operational engineering works at site. So to give you an update of where we are, or what we're doing on site at the moment, we're doing some RC and some core drilling. There's about 17 RC holes completed, and we're on our second core hole at the moment. The total amount of meters is around about 3,200 meters, a little bit over that at this point in time. There's a lot of holes in sample preparation at the moment. There's 3 currently in sampling. There's 10 holes in transit, and we have 1 hole that has arrived in Australia for assaying. We expect the results from this will be soon, shortly. I'm not exactly sure of the timing at this point in of status with the labs, but we are going to expect a steady stream of results certainly in the new year. And as another recap, I'm going back out, Asimwe and I are going back out to site this coming week to retouch base with government and community. We've developed very strong relationships there, and it's essential that we maintain that continuity of relationships, keep our stakeholders informed of what we're doing and what our future plans look like. I guess we'll come back to funding now, and everyone's quite disappointed in the performance of the share price so far. I have to say that it's extremely disappointing. Everyone's gutted by the way that the share price has been performing after the placement. We thought 21 cents was a reasonable price for that point in time in space, but there's been some unusual selling activity afterwards, of which I cannot explain why. But all I can say is that we're focused on the business and maintaining outcomes, which we see as positive. So we believe what we're seeing on site at the moment will result in particularly good results from the drilling next year. And hopefully the share price, it should recover. So all I can tell investors is hang in there. There's obviously people that want to get out of the stock. You can't do much about that. My job is to look after the business and provide the market with a buying opportunity. Would anybody, or perhaps Alex, I'd hand it over to you now for questions and answers from the floor. Unless, Asimwe, would you like to say anything to add to what I've been talking about?
Hey, Alistair. Sorry, my camera is getting a little bit muddy, but I just want to thank the shareholders for all the support they've been showing us. And obviously to thank you, Alistair, since you joined us, you did a very good job. And thanks the people of Malawi for the support from the local community at Balaka, and local government, the chiefs, and the federal government. They are showing a very tremendous support for us. So I think what I can say at the moment, obvious, the share price will do what have to do, but Lindian is in the best position ever since I've been involved over 5 years now, and we are looking forward for the bright future. Thank you.
Thanks, Asimwe. Thanks, Alistair. Yes, we have had, as I mentioned at the top, we've been inundated with questions, so we have a few to get through this morning. To start, Alistair, are there any visual rare earths mineralisation in your drilling?
Oh, sure. The geologists are mapping monazite both within the RC chips and the diamond or the core material that we're retrieving at the moment. So it presents itself as a very pale green, almost a sort of pistachio green monazite mineral. That's the mineral that contains the rare earths. And there's been substantial amount of visual identification of that mineral in a lot of the drill core.
So I see from the images of the drill hole locations you have drilled through the carbonatite into what you've previously described as a lower grade halo. Can you share what the core looks like here in this zone?
The lower grade halo I was talking about was a peripheral perimeter around the core carbonatite material. And we've had very little drilling into that at all at this point in time. So basically all our drilling is targeted into the central carbonatite zone. So we're seeing, because it's a breccia, it does have patches where it appears to be lower in grade, and then there's patches which are significantly mineralized in monazite. And that's what you'd expect in some of these type of carbonatite intrusive rock types. The low grade zones you're seeing, you know, if you've got 1% monazite, it's actually quite hard to see 1% monazite in a rock, but that's going 0.6% rare earths. So it's not out of the question that this is a large complex of mixed grade material with high grade and low grade patches. So it's consistent with what we'd expect so far.
So you referred to this program previously as mine development drilling, not exploration. Can you just give us a little bit more context here?
Well, exploration is ideally, it's a whole new realm of discovery of ideas or participation in work programs around ideas where you might think something is. Well, this is not where we think it is. We know it's there. It's a brownfields development project. We've had previous work that has identified mineralization of substantial grade. We've had an underground at it. We've seen historic work around the design of open pits and underground operations. And there's extensive amount of academic material published on this complex as well that gives us a high degree of confidence that this is a brownfields development project. And the fact that it sits within a granted mining license means that we are really in the mine development phase, even though we're doing some stuff which is, the drilling at the moment is more classified as resource development drilling. So we're identifying a program or implementing a program, identifying what are resources for the purpose of the fact that they then provide the substance for further metallurgical, mine engineering and civil engineering design programs. The nature of those design programs depends upon the grade and the size and the geometry of the deposit you're talking about. So we are in early stages of mine development. We've taken metallurgical samples for the test work, which will in part replicate previous historic works. And we'll then put a mine design around that resource to define what the mine scheduling and mine plan and mine design looks like. And then there's a little bit of civil engineering works as well. And just a point in clarification is that we're looking to get a demonstration plant on site as soon as possible, as soon as practical, such that we can start processing materials on site and selling it. It might not be a perfect plant, won't be a very big plant, it won't be optimized. The whole purpose of it is to actually operate it such that one, it generates cash flow, and two, it can be optimized. We could do a build book then of concentrate sales and work out what the optimum size plant is. So that's why I'm calling it mine development works programs at this point in time.
So do you intend to do any exploration drilling?
Not in the short term. There are areas where we'd potentially like to do exploration outside the Kangankundi complex, which we think have some interest and some features which are interesting in the context of Kangankundi. I guess you might say that the two deep holes that we're planning, the two 1,000 metre holes, are exploratory, but they are helpful in the context of the continuity of this feature, the Kangankundi complex at depth. And that provides some insights into what you think a mine plan might look like. For example, if it does continue at depth and you think it's going to be a particularly large pit, you need to know where the edge of that pit perimeter is. And so you design then your civil works and your plant location in a more distant location, so that you don't have to relocate it on the basis that you might find something that's a lot more bigger than you think because of this drilling. So those two holes, I guess, are exploratory holes, identifying features deep within the complex that helps us, gives an insight into our strategic planning for a mine design.
Do you anticipate any interruptions to drilling?
Well, the interruptions we're seeing so far, there's always interruptions to drilling. One is rain. We have had some storms that have interrupted intermittently drilling. They haven't persisted to an extent which we've had to pause or stop drilling. So we are continuing. So we might shorten our drilling day from, by 2 or 3 hours or something like that. We've had some interruptions because this carbonatite complex has got some cavities in it, and some of the cavities are inconsequential. They're about, they look to be about the size of a bowling ball or something that size, but other cavities are bigger, and they can be 2 or 3 meters in diameter, and that is causing some difficulty with our drilling exercise. With the risk of rods being stuck. In fact, we have rods stuck in one hole at the moment because it's hit a cavity which appears to have collapsed, and that's caused 3 or 4 days of the drill rig attempting to recover those rods out of the hole. So that's interrupted the drilling there. But this is not unexpected. Every program of drilling has its, the drillers are in their learning stage of how to drill this complex. And it's not something we can control very well. The cavities exist, so we have to deal with it. And out of interest, they seem to be more popular in the area around about 180 to 200 metres below the top of the hill, which puts them at about ground level. So we suspect there's some ground meteoric water interaction there, which is causing dissolution of the carbonate minerals, causing these cavities. It doesn't wash out the monazite mineralisation because monazite's not dissolvable in water. So the monazite still stays there. So this is just an insight into some of the features that cause interruptions to the drilling.
So when will phase 1 drilling wind up?
We're going to continue it right through the wet season as far as possible. There will be a short break over Christmas for the crews, and then recommence in the new year. And at this stage, we're just going to keep on drilling right through and indefinitely at this point in time.
So with respect to the phase 2 program and these 2 deep holes, could one of these be brought forward, and how will assay results shape your forward drill program?
I don't want to bring forward phase 2 drilling because it will take away drilling from resource definition work, which is important for mine, a resource statement plus mine design activities. So those 2 deep holes will be drilled either if, one, the the wet season is so heavy that we can't drill the resource definition drilling, then we'll bring those diamond rigs down into those pads and start those deeper holes. Logic there is that you don't have to move the rig. Therefore, it can stay in one spot and you can bring light vehicles in and out. It can continue drilling through the wet. The other timing for that would be at the end of resource definition drilling. We'll go and do those deep holes.
And can you just give us an update on the impact of the wet season? You've alluded to it there before previously. So what plans do you have through the wet, and how many rigs will you keep turning?
We've got 3 on site at the moment. There's a possibility in the future we might bring a second coring rig onto site, so to bring the total number to 4. We'll keep drilling so long as it's safe and practical to do so. But this district, which is called Balaka, is one of the drier parts of Malawi. We're seeing storms at the moment. There will be a period that the locals tell us where there's an intense period of rain over several weeks. So we just play this by ear at the moment. If it rains heavily and we've got 2 diamond rings on site, we'll do the deep holes. If it's still this intermittent rain all the way through the wet season, we'll keep all 4 or 3 rigs operating and hopefully get a 4th way in soon.
Now, you've said previously, Alistair, that the geology and what you're seeing there, it's non-radioactive. Is this true?
It's just true. It was very tempting to put out in one ASX release the fact that one of the guys on site, one of our female geologists, was questioning one of the more senior geologists about the amount of radioactivity. And she said, "Is this dangerous, this material?" And he said, "No, it's okay, less dangerous than a bunch of bananas." So she walked back on the site next day with a bunch of bananas, and they took the radiation meter and they measured the core, and it was going about 0.5 counts per second. And they put it up on the hand of bananas, it was going 2.5 counts per second. So that low radiation level we're seeing is consistent right through all the drilling samples. There might be some odd patches where it goes to about 4 counts per second or something like that, but it's still particularly low. We couldn't publish that data because it requires a table 1 and will require some assay data to support the handheld dose meter that we have on site. So we can't release that at this point in time, but I can tell you that it is non-radioactive. On this next trip, the guys on site are actually producing a sample of concentrated monazite for us, and we're going to measure the dosage meter on the concentrated monazite concentrate and see what the dose ratio there, but I'm not expecting it to be radioactive. And that is one of the key distinguishing features of this project. It is probably the only deposit in the world of non-radioactive monazite. That makes it extremely unique. We're very happy about that.
I'm sure. So look, can you then explain the significance of it being non-radioactive in a commercial sense?
So the vast majority of monazite projects will have radiation in them. When you concentrate it, so it's a lot of these projects I'm seeing are going, not much monazite grade. They're saying they're going to produce 40% grade or something like that. So you're actually concentrating the radioactive materials into the concentrate. There's a limitation in transport code. There's what's called a class 7 goods, and a class 7 goods is a material technically it goes over 10 becquerels of radiation counts, which is another measure of radiation, which I won't go into. If it's over 10 becquerels, it becomes a class 7 radioactive good, which means it has different transportation connotations and expenses. It also has what's called a denial of transport capability, where a ship captain, irrespective of a class 7 goods, a ship's captain can elect on his own freedom not to transport radioactive materials on his vessel. So it becomes a much more difficult product to transport around the world. Not impossible. Uranium concentrate is transported around, it just becomes very expensive and it has to, it's got its limitations. The second thing is there are environmental restrictions in many countries around the importation of radioactive materials, which is, Europe and the USA have very strict guidelines around the importation, very strict guidelines around the processing, as does China and Japan. So, to have a radioactive concentrate of rare earths becomes more problematic in where you can market it. If you have a non-radioactive monazite concentrate, it's a general goods and it doesn't have any of those restrictions. So it allows, one, for us to produce a mineral concentrate that's marketable throughout the world, and two, it allows us actually just to produce a mineral concentrate. So if you want to just stick to mineral concentrate early on in the commercial phase and build up a really good balance sheet and inventory of cash, build up your skill base of your organisation, and then later in life go into downstream separation and processing, this project is ideal for that. If you have a radioactive project, then your ability to, I guess that's why a lot of the juniors are actually going downstream into value adding, separation, because they've got radioactive substances that makes transportation particularly difficult. So we don't have to do that. We don't have to take on that extra capital or technical risk. And then you look at if you could transport radioactive materials within Australia, there's state restrictions. States don't like sharing radioactive substances for one state to become a waste disposal facility for another state's production. They got to keep it in state. So then you're restricted on your transportation of radioactive materials into states of Australia. So for us, Kangangundi, this is a massive opportunity to be actually upscale significant amount of production of non-radioactive substances, of non-radioactive monazite concentrate into any jurisdiction in the world. Huge advantage.
So are there any rare earth projects that you know of that have similar attributes in terms of being non-radioactive, like you mentioned here?
Answer's no. Happy to know about one, but I'd rather find it myself first. But I don't know of another one, ever. Never seen it.
So given that then, Alistair, is this attribute likely to be one of the key catalysts that makes a big off-taker want this project or a substantial off-take?
I'll paint that picture a little bit differently. We've got access to hydroelectric power. There's a potential of the mine site being fully electric mining fleet. We've got a processing technique at the moment, which is gravity separation. It's only using water of a non-radioactive substance. This could be the only project in the world that says we are a zero carbon footprint, non-radioactive, environmentally compliant project feeding into a market which is about carbon abatement strategies. That value proposition is extraordinarily unique. So this, and the fact that this can produce a concentrate at 60%, as we've seen historically, we just need to replicate that in modern techniques, modern work programs, means that will probably be the highest grade monazite concentrate in the world as well, because most of them go around 20 to 40% in grade, so they're particularly low compared to Kangangundi, which is 60%. So it's got all the attributes of being potentially one of the greatest rare earth projects in the world, from my environmental perspective, that is.
Now, just on assays, are first assays still on track for this month?
Possibly. I actually don't know whether we'll get them this month or not. They've had, we've had customs in South Africa and customs in Australia. They're in quarantine for a period of time. They are at the lab, and I can't foresee exactly the time frame that they will be presented to the company. I have a feeling it won't be December. I suspect it's going to be early January, very early January. So I really am not sure at this point in time. It's at the, it's out of my control really at this point in time. It's at the lab, so it's in line for being assayed. But as soon as we see those results, there'll be an ASX release for sure.
Now, Alistair, when is the resource statement due, and what's the latest on that?
Well, we're still on track for something like Q2 next year, given the fact that we're continuing to drill through the wet season. I think we're still on track for a second quarter next year statement of a resource statement of some sort.
And so when do you expect to report at least a target?
The resource statement target?
Yes, correct.
Well, second quarter next year.
So do you think that not having a JORC compliant mineral resource statement prevents some investors from buying your stock?
Well, yes and no. Investors, it depends which type of investor you're talking about. An institutional investor needs a gauge, a yardstick of some sort to value the project, and it does that by basically saying what's the resource size, what's the grade, and we don't have that at this point in time. So we're still really in the speculative range of people assessing the value of the stock. And the institutions will come once we have a resource statement and metallurgical results.
And so finally, on the mineral resource statement, what's the operations development plan in your view?
The ops development plan would be to get a demonstration plant on site as soon as possible. We'll do a small drill and blast program, produce some ore, mineralised material. ASX won't let me say that word just yet, and take it down to a plant and get it started operating by late next year, probably early 2024. So we're going through the process at the moment of identifying what type of equipment we need and where they could come from and how we can establish that on site. But we have a mining license and an environmental certificate to be able to do that. So that's currently in plan at the moment, when we hope to actually have that installed sometime late next year and operating in 24 and producing somewhere around, anything between 2 or 3, maybe even 5,000 tonnes of rare earths per annum.
Thanks, Alistair. I'd like to call in Asimwe just to answer a couple of these questions. Asimwe, if I can just get you off mute for a second.
Yes, sir.
I see you Lindian Resources is doing a lot of work with government and community. How are you going to ensure investors see less sovereign risk given this work?
Sovereign risk, I think there's a lot of activity going on in Malawi with other mining companies, and Malawi it has English laws. They are very at the moment, our relationship with the government obviously is very good, and the government is very supportive to make sure that this project is going to production. And if you look at the background of the project, we have a consent order from the High Court of Malawi, which protect us that there's no any changes can happen in this in our mining license. So we think we are very set to get this production, this project to production. And I think Alistair has been in Malawi for 9 years. He worked in Malawi, and I think he can add more about sovereign risk. Alistair?
Malawi's part of the British Commonwealth. Its parliamentary system is a derivative of the Westminster system. It has a law system which is derived from English law. It has a well-working legal system. It has 30% tax, a 5% royalty. It's never had a coup. It's never had anything of particular trouble. It's a very stable, well-balanced society. It's very poor, and it's reliant on World Bank and IMF funding and sovereign funds to actually support it, because 80% of the population are subsistence farmers. They live by the crop they grow this year. it's not violent whatsoever. It's particularly safe to work around that country. It's got a crime statistic of less than what Australia has. So I don't see sovereign risk as being an issue whatsoever. I've seen some outcomes from legal systems, which means they uphold the law beyond anything else. You know, you can't say that in some African countries, but you could say that in Malawi. So I see the sovereign risk as being particularly low.
Thanks, Alistair. Now, Asimwe, I read that the Mines Minister visited the project recently. What's the feedback been? Asimwe?
We've been working closely with the government of Malawi, as I said before, from the local government, from the chief. The mining minister was at the site. We are going this week, we are going back to Malawi and we expect to meet him. The feedback is they want to see this project going to production. Obviously, it's been frozen for almost 30 years, and that's why we are getting a lot of support from them. So, the current government is very supportive of mining because they see mining industry as one of their next push to for their economy. They are depending a lot in agriculture, especially in tobacco. So they are very promoting mining, and obviously Kangankunde is one of the projects they see that has potential to add a lot of value to their economy. Alistair, do you have something to add?
Here, 100%. They're very, very keen to see this go into operations.
Thanks, guys. So look, I'll address this last question to both of you as well. So when you're in the country later this week, will you update the Mines Minister's department? And can you just talk us through the process for that? What are you planning in terms of additional meetings or anything like that over there to sort of, you know, maintain that really close relationship that you've talked about?
I'll answer that the same way. There is a meeting scheduled with the Minister of Mines, the Principal Secretary and the Director and Commissioner of Mines, along with a board member of Rift Valley Resource Developments and some of our own team members over there. So we'll be briefing them on things like what we've done with funding, how the drill program's going, where the assays are, what we're expecting and what we plan to get this into operation. So that meeting's happening this week. We've also got several meetings with the community, some in Balaka with some of the more government orientated people, but mostly with two people which are very important, which is a traditional area senior chief whose name is Chentunya, and the other one which is a local area village chief, Makalela. So Chentunya has a bigger district. Makalela's chieftain is right on the Kangankunde project. So we'll be involved with them quite intimately about how things are going, want some feedback on how we're performing so far in terms of their expectations of their people's involvement with the project, you know, how they're employed and whatever. But we'll give them then insight into what we're doing in the next coming year, such that they can provide that feedback in their own communities.
Thanks, Alistair. I might address this one to Asimwe as well. Asimwe, if I can just get you off mute, can you just give us a feel for the type of groups that have approached you to secure offtake?
I think the best person to answer that is Alistair, but I'll say a little bit. Obviously, since we got control of this project, there have been a lot of interest, and this interest most from end users and from the west, from the east. But we can't say too much at the moment because some of those are ongoing discussions. But maybe Alistair, if you have something to add on that.
The type of groups interested in our concentrate at the moment are broad. Obviously, you know, China being a big part of the whole rare earths industry are particularly interested, and unusually there's I think the book of notes I've got at the moment is around about 150,000 tonne per annum of concentrate, which would tell you that there's something wrong with the supply chain management or the supply of rare earths within China, if there's that much demand, as well as obviously demand from outside the world for rare earth materials. But importantly, there's quite a lot of a book build outside China. I haven't touched on Europe at this point in time. I have some views on or some early interaction there, but I'd say that there's probably a call for 20 to 50,000 tonne per annum of mineral concentrate just outside China that I know of at the moment. So we're getting a broad range of interest, and I think once people appreciate the size and the grade and the fact that we can produce a non-radioactive concentrate at a zero carbon footprint, I expect that the interest in our product will escalate dramatically. And the fact that we can get to market very quickly and very early, we have a mining license, we've got an environmental certificate, it allows us to get to production. We can start small scale, and then we can build a bigger plant later in life and subsequent builds to grow with the market. So I think we are going to be a particularly important member of the supply chain in the rare earth market, and it's coming quickly.
So we talked about the operation development plan previously. Could you just sort of reiterate for us the time frame for this supposed small scale plant to produce concentrate? And are there do you need any permissions for that? Are you permitted to do it?
No, we're permitted to do it. Well, I've got a couple of additional meetings I'm having with Power and Road, Department of Power and Roads in Malawi, just to touch on some of the approval process, but we see that it's fully permitted from an environmental and a mining perspective. Therefore, the other certificates needed or the other facilities needed are relatively easy to come by. So we would expect that we'd want, so this demonstration plant that we're building will be a relatively simple skid mounted, if you like to put it that way, mechanoed, prefabricated plant that will ship to site and bolt together. There'll be a mobile crushing plant, there will be a grinding circuit, and then there's spirals and shaking tables and other equipment behind that, which will eventually optimize. But it'll start rudimentarily, construction in the second half of next year, and hopefully be operating in 24, and we'll see further improvements on its performance as we try and get better recovery from the plant, and a book build of concentrate that allows us then to design the larger plant in full scale in an optimized way. So reiterate, second quarter next year, resource statement, second half, demonstration plant operating in 24, with probable outcome from there is that the full scale plant will, in the optimized plant, will go into construction sometime in 25 and hopefully operational in 26. And what that is at the moment, at this stage, I put my bet on something like a 1.5 million tonne per annum plant would be the optimized large scale plant.
Fantastic. Well, look, that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank you all for joining me, and I'd like to thank Alistair and Asimwe for taking the time to answer some questions. Thank you all for the high level of questions. Apologies if we didn't get to your question, but it shows a high level of engagement among Lindian shareholders. As I mentioned before, a recording of the webinar will be on Lindian's website and social media platforms later today. Alistair, before I let you go, do you have any final comments to leave with us?
I reiterate what Asimwe said, and I thank shareholders for their support, and look forward to updating them with what I think will be a tier 1, globally significant, fantastic rare earth project, the best rare earth project in the world.
Fantastic. Asimwe, anything to add before we leave us today?
That's what I would say. Thank you.
Fantastic. That wraps it up for us here. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.